Hello, and welcome to my channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud. This is a little blue book. Whoops, sorry. This is a little blue book. It happens to be Little Blue Book number 150 of the Little Blue Book series, and this one is entitled Lost Civilizations, written by Charles J. Finger. Copyright 1922. This is part 4. We left off at the top of page 34. And here we go. It is difficult to account for this wavering conduct of Atalapa, so different from the bold and decided character which history ascribes to him. There is no doubt that he made his visit in perfect good faith to the white men, though Pizarro was probably right in conjecturing that this amiable disposition stood on a very precarious footing. There is as little reason to suppose that he distrusted the sincerity of the strangers, or he would not thus necessarily have proposed to visit them unarmed. His original purpose of coming with all his force was doubtless to display his royal state, and perhaps also to show greater respect for the Spaniards. But when he consented to accept their hospitality and pass the night in their quarters, he was willing to dispense with a great deal of his armed soldiery, and visit them in a manner that implied entire confidence in their good faith. He was too absolute in his own empire, easily to suspect, and he could probably not comprehend the audacity with which a few men like those now assembled in Caxamachia meditated an assault on a powerful monarch in the midst of his victorious army. He did not know the character of the Spaniard. It was not long before sunset when the van of the royal procession entered the gates of the city. First came some 100 of the menials employed to clear the party from every obstacle, and singing songs of triumph as they came, which in our ears, says one of the conquerors, sounded like the songs of hell. Then followed other bodies of different ranks and dressed in different liveries. Some wore a snowy stuff, checked white and red, like the squares of a chessboard. Others were clad in pure white, bearing hammers or maces of silver and copper, and the guards, together with those of the immediate attendants upon the prince, were distinguished by a rich azure livery and a profusion of gay ornaments, while the large pendants attached to the ears indicated the Peruvian noble. Elevated above his vassals came the Inca Atahualpa, borne on a sedan or open litter, on which was a sort of throne made of massive gold of an inestimable value. The palanquin was lined with the richly colored plumes of tropical birds and studded with shining plates of gold and silver. The monarch's attire was much richer than on the preceding evening. Round his neck was suspended a collar of emeralds of common size and brilliancy. His short hair was decorated with golden ornaments, and the imperial borea encircled his temples. The bearing of the Inca was sedate and dignified, and from his lofty station he looked down on the multitudes below with an air of composure like one accustomed to command. As the leading lines of the procession entered the great square, larger, says an old chronicler, than any square in Spain, they opened to the right and left for the royal retinue to pass. Everything was conducted with admirable order. The monarch was permitted to traverse the plaza in silence, and not a Spaniard was to be seen. When some 5,000 or 6,000 of people had entered the place, Atahualpa halted, and turning around with an inquiring look, demanded, "Where are the strangers?" At this moment, Fray Vicente de Valverde, a Dominican friar, Piazzo's chaplain and afterwards Bishop of Cusco, came forward with his breviary, or as other accounts say, a Bible in one hand and a crucifix in the other, and approaching the Inca, told him that he came by order of his commander to expound to him the doctrines of the true faith, for which purpose the Spaniards had come from a great distance to his country. The friar then explained, as clearly as he could, the mysterious doctrine of the Trinity, and ascending high in his account, began with the creation of man, thence passed to his fall, to his subsequent redemption by Jesus Christ, to the crucifixion and the ascension. When the Savior left the Apostle Peter as his vice-regent upon earth, this power had transmitted to the successors of the Apostle, good and wise men who, under the title of popes, held authority over all powers and potentates on earth. One of the last of these popes had commissioned the Spanish emperor, the most mighty monarch in the world, to conquer and convert the natives in this western hemisphere, and his general Francisco Pizarro had now come to execute this important mission. The friar concluded with beseeching the Peruvian monarch to receive him kindly, to abjure the errors of his own faith and embrace that of the Christians now proffered to him, the only one by which he could hope for salvation, and furthermore to acknowledge himself a tributary of the Emperor Charles V, who in that event would aid and protect him as his royal vassal. Whether Atalupe possessed himself of every link in the curious chain of argument by which the monk connected Piazzo with St. Peter may be doubted. It is certain, however, that he must have had very incorrect notions of the Trinity, if, as Garcilaso states, that the interpreter Filippo explained it by saying that the Christians believed in three gods and in one God, and that made four. But there is no doubt he perfectly comprehended that the drift of the discourse was to persuade him to resign his scepter and acknowledge the supremacy of another. The eyes of the Indian monarch flashed fire, and his dark brow grew darker as he replied, "I will be no man's tributary. I am greater than any prince upon earth. Your emperor may be a great prince. I do not doubt it when I see that he has sent his subjects so far across the waters, and I am willing to hold him as a brother. As for the Pope of whom you speak, he must be crazy to talk of giving away countries which do not belong to him. For my faith," he continued, "I will not change it. Your own God, as you say, was put to death by the very men whom he created. But mine," he concluded, pointing to his deity, then sinking in glory behind the mountains, "my God still lives in the heavens and looks down on his children." He then demanded a Valverde by what authority he had said these things. The friar pointed to the book which he held as his authority. Chalupe, taking it, turned over the pages a moment, then, as the insult he had received probably flashed across his mind, he threw it down with vehemence and exclaimed, "Tell your comrades that they shall give me an account of their doings in my land. I will not go from here till they have made me full satisfaction for all the wrongs they have committed." The friar, greatly scandalized by the indignity offered to the sacred volume, stayed only to pick it up, and hasting to Pizarro informed him of what had been done, exclaiming at the same time, "Do you not see that while we stand here wasting our breath talking with this dog full of pride as he is, the fields are filling with Indians? Set on at once. I absolve you." Pizarro saw that the hour had come. He waved a white scarf in the air, the appointed signal. The fatal gun was fired from the fortress. Then, springing into the square, the old Spanish captain and his followers, shouting the war cry of Saint Jago, at them, It was answered with the battle cry of every Spaniard in the city as rushing from the avenues of the great halls in which they were concealed. They poured into the plazas, horse and foot, each in his dark column, and threw themselves in the midst of the Indian crowd. The latter, taken by surprise, stunned by the report of artillery and muskets, the echoes of which reverberated like thunder from the surrounding buildings, and blinded by the smoke which rolled in sulphurous volumes along the square, was seized with panic. They knew not whither to fly for refuge from the coming ruin. Nobles and commoners, all were trampled down under the fierce charge of the cavalry, who dealt their blows right and left without sparing, while their swords, flashing through the thick gloom, carried dismay into the hearts of the natives, who now for the first time saw the horse and the rider in all their terrors. They made no resistance, as indeed they had no weapons with which to make it. Every avenue to escape was closed, for the entrance of the square was choked up with the dead bodies of men who had perished in vain efforts to fly. And such was the agony of the survivors under the terrible pressure of their assailants, struggles burst through the wall of stone, and that a large body of Indians, by their convulsive dried clay which formed part of the boundary of the piazza, it fell, leaving an opening through which multitudes now found their way into the country, still hotly pursued by the cavalry, who, leaping the fallen rubbish, hung on the road of the fugitives, striking them down in all directions. Meanwhile the fight, or rather the massacre, continued hot around the Inca, whose person was the great object of the assault. His faithful rallying about threw themselves in the way of the assailants, and strove, by tearing them from their saddles, or at least by offering their own bosoms as a mark for the vengeance, to shield their beloved master. It is said by some authorities that they carried weapons concealed under their clothes. If so, it availed them little, as it is not pretended that they used them. But the most timid animal will defend itself when at bay. That they did not do so in the present instance is proof that they had no weapons to use. Yet they still continued to force back the cavaliers, clinging to their horses, while with dying gasps, and as one was cut down, another taking the place of his fallen comrade with a loyalty truly affecting. The Indian monarch, stunned and bewildered, saw his faithful subjects falling around him without hardly comprehending the situation. The litter on which he rode heaved to and fro, and as the mighty press swayed backward and forwards, and he gazed on the overwhelming ruin like some forlorn mariner who, tossed about in his bark by the furious elements, sees the lightning's flash and hears the thunder round him, with the consciousness that he can do nothing to avert his fate. Pardon me. At length, weary with the work of destruction, the Spaniards, as the shades of evening drew deeper, felt afraid that the royal prize might after all elude them, and some of the cavaliers made a desperate effort to end the affray at once by taking Atalupe's life, but Piazza, who was nearest his person, called out with stentorian voice, "Let no one who values his life strike at the Inca," and stretching out his arm to shield him, received a wound on the hand from one of his own men, the only wound received by a Spaniard in action. The struggle now became fiercer than ever round the royal litter. It reeled more and more, and at length several of the nobles who supported it having been slain, it was overturned, and the Indian prince would have come with violence to the ground, had not his fall been broken by the efforts of Pizarro and some others of the cavaliers, who caught him in their arms. The imperial brola was instantly snatched from his temples by a soldier named Estate, and the unhappy monarch, strongly secured, was removed to a neighboring building, where he was carefully guarded. All attempts at resistance now ceased. The fate of the Inca soon spread over the town and country. The charm which might have held the Peruvians together was dissolved. Every man thought only of his own safety. Even the soldiery escaped on the adjacent fields, took alarm, and learning the fatal tidings were seen flying in every direction before their pursuers. At length, night, more pitiful than man, threw her friendly mantle over the fugitives, and the scattered troops of Pizarro rallied once more at the sound of the trumpet in the bloody square of Caxamalca. One more tale of horror must close the chapter, and incredible as it may seem, we have it in the testimony of Secretary Exarchus, Peru, Tom 111, page 202, as well as others, and the facts are recorded with remarkable uniformity. Atahualpa, being taken prisoner, told Pizarro that to regain his freedom he would fill the room with gold as high as he could reach, and standing on tiptoe, set a mark on the wall. The chamber was 17 feet by 22 feet, and the mark set was 9 feet from the floor. The Inca also agreed to fill an adjoining and smaller room twice with silver, and stipulated that all should be done within 2 months. The terms being agreed on, couriers were sent out over the country, and the devotion of the people was such that the ransom poured in, but a little too slowly for the Spaniard, who, seeing the shining heap of treasure, some of it being massive plates of gold and silver weighing 25 pounds, found their avarice sharpened. At this time, Ovidio tells us, the Spanish horses were shod with silver and sometimes with gold as a substitute for iron. Some of the ransom came in the shape of goblets, ewers, vases, as well as fine ornaments. One, a fountain of gold with birds and animals of the same metal about the base, being of such beauty as to awaken the admiration of the soldiery. But beautiful or not, all was broken up and melted into ingots, and the total amount thus gained, the gold alone, amounted to the equivalent of 15,500,000, and most magnificent ransom that history records. But it was all of no avail to save Atahualpa, for the day came on August 29th of 1533, when he was led out, chained hand and foot, and taken to the place where he was to be burned to death. Wow. At the last moment, the priest Valverde offered him baptism, promising that, did he accept the Christian faith, he would die by the garrote instead of fire. Imploring Piazzo to protect his young children, he received his stoical bearing and died at the hands of those who had ravished the country and destroyed a gentle people. New chapter, Mexico. In the year 1519, the Spaniards under Cortez entered the city of Mexico, a place the existence of which a year before no one in the eastern hemisphere had suspected. 26 years earlier, Columbus had made his first landing and had died in 1516 under the impression that he had discovered a land of dark savagery. But the Spanish conquerors saw something vastly different to their expectations. Men and women of the Aztec race have attained a civilization. There in the marketplace, Cortez and his little corps of cavalry came upon traders, goldsmiths, potters, and jewelers, stone cutters, mat and chair makers. On little tables under colored awnings were displayed for sale tapestries, curtains, coverlets, ornaments, and curious toys made in imitation of birds and fishes, with movable heads and bodies, and feather and scale of gold and silver. Animals both wild and domesticated were offered for sale, and there were meats of all kinds, and domestic poultry, game from the nearby mountains, and fruits of all kinds. There were, says Diaz in his History de la Conquest, soldiers who had been in many parts of the world, in Constantinople and in Rome, and through all Italy, and who said that a marketplace so large, so well ordered and regulated, and so filled with people, they had never seen. The marketplace stood in the shadow of the great Techicali, a pyramid, the base of which was composed of huge blocks of sculpted stone, with a foundation between 30 and 40 feet deep, humbled. The structure was probably 300 feet square at the base and 100 feet in height. To the top of the Terracoli, Cortez ascended in company with the Emperor Montezuma to see the city with its streets and canals, its terraced and beflowered roofs spread out like a map. Looking one way could be seen the fertile valley patterned with cultivated spaces, and there dotted with creatures that grazed. Nearer were the long stone buildings in which the priests and educators lived, and this was a people by no means unlearned. Of their gentleness and morals, the conquerors themselves took note. According to La Palu, their calculation of the length of the year corresponded with the celebrated calculations of the Caliphate Almanan that fell short only about 2 minutes of the true time, while the calendar at the conquerors was 11 days out. I think we'll stop there.